So if you just put your hand over your eyes, I open my eyes to see the spiritual truth today. Now over your ears, I open my ears to hear the spiritual truth today. Just put your hands over your heart and extend out your arms. I open my heart to receive the spiritual truth today. The spiritual truth that I'm working with today is the same one I worked with last week because I really want us to get it. You and I were designed to be happy. We were designed to be happy. It's what Spirit wants for us. We're not designed to be sad or depressed or to suffer from we're not enoughism. That's not what Spirit wants for us. We're in a little series, just 2 weeks, we're winding it up this week, of how to get happy, how to recognize when we're happy and to increase that happiness in our lives. Last week we spent time anchoring ourselves in understanding that happiness is more about who than what in our life. More about who than what. Happiness is relational. It's not possessional. Now, here's the thing. We want to be careful whenever we have medicine like this that says happiness is more about a who than a what. We don't want to just let the pendulum swing so far the other way that we think what's are bad, because what's never bad. We want you to have all the what's you want whenever you want them. We just don't want you to think that that's going to be the reason you get happy. Because what's can go away. Your happiness is with you all of the time. The opposite of who is not what. The opposite of who is knows in our life. And the truth is that what's can enrich our lives. You know, you get a fifth wheeler and it's a what, and you travel the country and you meet new people and you make new friends and you're out in nature. That's an enrichment in your life. I love this story. I tell it maybe every 2 years because I love it so much. So some of you have heard it. It's about my friend Walt Jones. Probably one person has stirred my impression. No one person has stirred my imagination over the years more than Walt Jones of Tacoma, Washington. Walt outlived his third wife, to whom he was married for 52 years. When she died, someone said to Walt that it must be sad losing such a long-time friend. His response was, well, of course it was, but then again, it may be for the best. Why is that? Well, I don't want to be negative or say anything to defame her wonderful character, but she kind of petered out on me in the last decade. When asked to explain, he went on to add, well, she never wanted to do nothing, just kind of became a stick in the mud. 10 years ago, when I was 94, I told my wife, ain't never seen nothing except the Pacific Northwest. She asked me what was on my mind. I told her I was thinking about buying a motorhome and maybe we could visit all 48 of the contiguous states. What do you think of that? She said, I think you're out of your mind, Walt. Why do you say that? Well, we'd get mugged out there. We'd die and there wouldn't be a funeral parlor. Then she's asked me, who's going to drive, Walter? And I said, I am, Lemmykins. You'll kill us, she said. I'd like to make footprints in the sand of time before I check out, but you can't make footprints in the sand of time if you're sitting on your butt, unless you want to make butt prints on the sand of time. So now that she's gone, Walt, what do you intend to do? What do I intend to do? I buried the old gal and bought me a motorhome. This was 1976, and I intend to visit all 48 of the states to celebrate our bicentennial. Well, Walt got to all 43 of the states that year, selling curios and souvenirs. He hadn't had his motorhome but a few months, and his wife had only been buried for 6 months, when he was seen driving down the street with a rather attractive 62-year-old woman at his side. Walt, he was asked, yeah, who's that woman sitting by your side? Who's your new lady friend, Walt? To which he replied, yes, she is. Yes, she is what? My lady friend. Lady friend? Walt, you've been married 3 times. You're 104 years of age. That woman must be 4 decades younger than you. Well, he responded, I quickly discovered that man cannot live in a motorhome alone. I understand that, Walt. You probably miss having someone to talk to after having had a companion all these years. Without hesitation, Walt replied, you know, I do miss that too. True? Are you referring to a romantic interest? I just might. Walt, what? There comes a time in a person's life when you knock that stuff off. Sex, he replied? Yes. Why? Well, because that kind of physical exertion could be hazardous to a person's health. Walt considered the question and said, well, if she dies, she dies. But the truth is, it's not always the what that gets us away from our happiness. Sometimes what thwarts our happiness is the idea that we can't be both happy and holy in our life. Maybe we didn't grow up in a church that had a spiritual principle that said you were designed to be happy in your life. Maybe you walked away from God feeling like, you know what, I'm either going to go to church or an ashram or a synagogue or coven or a temple, or I'm going to be happy. Because most of the unhappy people are in those spiritual communities in your life. You know, that's a false dichotomy. You can be happy and spiritual at the same time. So today, to finish up this little series, I borrowed from the wisdom of Jesus in his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. In this sermon, Jesus answers our question, how do I become happier in my life? Now, in the Sermon on the Mount, you'll remember, those of you who know this sermon, you'll remember there are lots of blesseds. The translation from the Greek blessed is actually fortunate or happy. So really what we're saying here is happy are those. Happy are those. You know, Jesus went to the mountainside, he sat down, and he said to his disciples, and you know, again, Jesus had three groups of followers. He had the disciples, the apostles rather. The apostles were the people who were his interns, the ones that were studying to be like him. Then there were the disciples. Those were the people who believed in the work and the teachings of Jesus, completely believed. And then there were the followers. The believers would go everywhere Jesus went, just like the apostles did. But the followers, if Jesus was in the area, they would make sure that they got to go and hear him. Well, in this Sermon on the Mount, which was probably his biggest attended sermon, and one in which he was able to tell people how to become happy in our life, he had this to say. The first, he had 8 things to say that would help us become happy. The first thing he had to say is, happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And we know that heaven in this church, heaven is right now. You're in heaven right now. It's at hand. It's not somewhere that you're going to go to after you die. Happy are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of happiness right where we are right now. And successful are the poor in spirit. See, we want to listen to these carefully, even though you think you might know them, even though you think you've heard them before, because poor in spirit is what he said. He didn't say poor in materiality. He didn't say poor in cash. He didn't say poor in housing. He didn't say poor in cars. He said poor in spirit, just like Buddha would teach us. Buddha would say, empty your mind. Make your mind poor of information. Keep it clear so that you can empty those preconceived ideas that you have. Jettison your prejudgments of people and situations, your prejudices. Get rid of your little self, your spiritual pride and arrogance in your life. Get rid of that idea that you know everything about a subject or about everything. Because once we convince ourselves that we know everything, we stop listening. And nothing else can get in. There may be something about these Beatitudes that you think, I have heard about the Beatitudes before in my religion of origin. I've heard it, in fact, about this church from time to time. She talked about the Beatitudes, or guest speakers taught about the Beatitudes. I promise you, there's something this morning that you haven't heard about these Beatitudes. But you'll only hear it if you're listening with an empty mind, with an open mind in our life. Happy are those who mourn, that they may be comforted. Happy that those may be born. It's important. Jesus is telling us when you're sad, because you're going to be sad. There are times when you will be sad. Jesus is saying, be sad when you're sad. Be authentically sad when you're sad. But here I'm going to tell you how to move through it. And how to move through it is to mourn whatever it is you're sad about. Don't go around it. I lost our dog this week, 14-year-old. We've had him for 14 years. And I have been enormously sad. Crying at the craziest times. I may break out in tears right now here tonight. And you'll know why. Because I'm mourning. I'm not going to go around it. I'm not going to paste a happy smile on my face. Now the truth is, doing this work, not going around it, I have reached a certain level of happiness about Rumi being gone. Because I've gone through it. I didn't try and ignore it. I didn't stick my head in the sand. Happy are those that mourn, for they may be comforted. And so many of you have comforted us. But the most important thing about this is that I allowed it. I allowed myself to grieve in my life. See, we call that religious science, we call it spiritual bypass. Spiritual bypass is when something unhappy happens to you and you go around it. You don't go through it. Ernest Holmes said you have to go through it in order to get out the other end. Because if you just go around it, you're going to keep going around it and around it and around it and around it, and you'll never get out the other end. You'll never get out the side. See, that behavior of bypassing leads to a phony life, and a phony life is not a happy life. We have to sit Shiva on some of the things that make us sad so that we can actually know what's going on. We can feel it. We have to sit Shiva on our limited thinking about our health, about our wealth, about our kids' future, about our aging process. We have to be able to mourn those parts of us that are sad for ourselves. The next one is, happy are those that are meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So let's talk about the language of the Bible. In the Old Testament and the New Testament, the word earth, happy are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. See, the earth in the Old Testament and the New Testament in New Thought thinking represents our outer experience. What happens in the life. Our work is never to work on the outer. It's always to work on the inner. And if you want to inherit a happier outer, you have to work on the inner. You have to work on your meekness. Now here's the thing. Meekness is a word that was, remember the Gospels were written 2,000 years ago, and meekness doesn't mean what it meant 2,000 years ago. Just like now, we might, sometimes I hear the guys in the band say, when they hear something they like, sweet, they'll say sweet. See, we used to say sweet when it tasted good, but now we say sweet when it hears good too, in our life. We used to say texting represented a body of a written language. Now texting is how people communicate with one another in their life. We used to say gay meant only happy. Now it represents 10% of the population. See, meek doesn't mean doormat. It doesn't mean kick me when I'm down. It doesn't mean that I'm weak and I don't have personal power in my life. It means that I've made conscious contact with God. It means that I'm working on the inner, and the outer will begin to rejoice in it in my life. See, it means making contact with harmony in my life. It means that I'm on the same page as God is on. It means that I'm swimming downstream, not trying to swim upstream in my life. It means that I'm allowing the good that God wants for us to come to me, and I'm not trying to grab it all the time. That's what meek means in our life. It means that we're relaxed, that we're not anxious, that we're trusting, that we're in the groove. Happy are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Let's break this down so we get the full benefit of it. New Thought meaning, the New Thought translation of righteousness means alignment thinking. Righteousness, alignment thinking. Righteousness, alignment thinking. Let's let go of that idea that we're talking about righteousness meaning people who are morally superior to us, who get to judge what we are doing, or judging others, or that God loves them more than us because they're righteous people. Plenty of people who have hungered and thirst after righteousness have sinned in their life. In fact, The people who hunger and thirst after righteousness and sin, those are my people. Those are the ones I want to be around. They got back up. They fell down, but they got back up. And from them, that's where I'll get help along my path. To tell you the truth, the whole 12-step program is built along this premise. That people who fell down and got back up have something to teach one another. The folks who think they're righteous all the time, oh, I never have a negative thought. I never think bad about anybody. Oh, people trespass against me, and I just forgive them, and I pray for them, and I'm just happy as a clam. Those folks have nothing to show me, not one thing. I want to be on the path with the person who has the wandering eye and knew how to get that wandering eye back in the right place in their life. I want to be on the path with the people who got in financial trouble and had the guts to cut up their credit cards and begin again and learn again. That's who I want to be. I want to be on the path with folks who got a contentious divorce but didn't turn their kids into little hate machines. You know, those are the ones I want to be on the path with. I don't know anybody who wants to be around the righteous people of that old definition, but I know everybody wants to be on in the company of righteous people who are aligned with God. They're happy people. And we want to be around happy. We not only want to be happy, we want to be around happy people. Blessed and happy are the people who are merciful, for they shall obtain mercy in our life. For me, this is a powerful teaching that Jesus was telling us. You want to be happy? Learn how the law of circulation works and never forget it. Never forget it. Because if we can learn how that law of circulation works, what we put out is going to come back to us. If we can learn it and then act from it, our life will be totally different in our life. It also calls for compassion for us, this particular wisdom of Jesus. You know, if there are people who are really have screwed up in their life, and you have some ability to show them mercy out loud. Talk to them about it. Listen to them about it. And show them mercy in your life. Mostly, though, I want us to learn how to show mercy to ourselves in our life. As a species, we are so hard on ourselves. We need to show mercy. What happened to happen. It's over. You cannot unscramble eggs. It's done. Now it's time to show mercy to ourselves, because happy people are the merciful. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. Now there are a lot of ways I could describe pure of heart. One way I do not describe it is goody two-shoes. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the heart that isn't clogged up with stories and false facts. You know, facts change all the time. But we hold people to old facts, you and I. And in fact, we're going to be working on this in Human Spirit. The team met last week, and I'm very excited about what we're going to be doing here to make ourselves understand joy through this whole notion of stop making up stories about what happens in our life. Somebody that we want to notice us doesn't notice us, and we say they're snubbing us. And then we call everybody we know and tell them that they snubbed us, and we make up a whole entire story. When the truth is, they may have lost their 14-year-old dog that afternoon. We don't know. We have to stop making up stories in our life about why. These stories are called separators. They're separators because they separate us from one another, and they separate us from God in our life. Happy are the pure in spirit, for they shall know all forms of God. They'll know joy. They'll know peace. They'll know abundance. They'll know creativity in our life. Blessed and happy are the persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now remember, heaven is right here, where we are right now. So let's break this down, because again, it can sound moralistic, and this church does not teach morals. We never have, we never will. We teach values, but we don't teach morals. That's for you to decide, and only you to decide. You shouldn't let anybody else tell you what your moral stand is. Don't let's join so many other people who under the banner of God are trying to judge and persecute other people. It's a sad state in this country that we've got people that call themselves God-fearing people who are hating on so many people in this society. The way we would say it is this: happy are those who stand up for those who are less fortunate than we are, for those who are less happy than we are. And I'm not talking about money only, but standing up to those people who are being persecuted by others. Happy are those who stand up. You know, what we'd say is this. Righteousness is congruent thinking. It's thinking congruent with peace and commitment to our success in our lives. And all beings are sacred. Martin Niemöller, many of you know this, during World War II, he was a pastor. And during World War II, and he was persecuted for this, but he stood up to the sake of righteousness. When he said they came for the Jews and I wasn't a Jew and I didn't stand up. And they came for the Catholics and I wasn't a Catholic and I didn't stand up. And they came for the gay people and I wasn't a gay person and I didn't stand up. And they came for the trade unionists and I wasn't a trade unionist and I didn't stand up. He said that, and he was persecuted for it in his life. Colonel Vindman stood up. And I'm going to tell you today, he's a happier guy than he was last week working in that crazy place. Happy are the righteous. People, you know, Martin Luther King, he stood up. And he was persecuted for it. Those of us in this room who feel strongly about gun violence need to stand up in whatever way we do. Those of us who are willing and anxious to say Black Lives Matter need to stand up. Those of us who are worried about kids in cages, we need to stand up. Happy are those who stand up for the sake of alignment thinking, for the sake of righteousness in our life. Not easy. We have to do it. Sometimes we stand up and we are persecuted. We're ostracized by family. People on Facebook are unfriending people on Facebook. I don't even know how to do it. That's how fortunate I am. But I'm going to tell you something. We have to stand up. That's what spiritual people do. And I have made the mistake in my life of not standing up, and I know some of you have too, where you've heard a homophobic joke, or you've heard a racist joke, and you didn't say anything because it wasn't comfortable. And you wanted those jokesters to like you. You didn't like what they were saying. You didn't agree with them, but you didn't stand up. Whenever I've done that in my life, I wasn't happy. I would go home and kick myself all around the house. Happy are those who stand up for the sake of righteousness. Happy are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Here's the thing. You are the child of God. You're a chip off the old block. You're the spinning image of God. But here's the thing. We're not talking, again, about outer peacemaking. Those of you who have family members who are warring and you've got yourself in the middle of it, never worked out good, did it? No, never worked out good. I've gotten myself in the middle of friends who are warring. Never worked out good. The peacemaking process is to make ourselves peaceful. And when we walk in peace, when we walk with the energy and the aura of peace, we have just become a peacemaker. And we will be called the children of God in our life. So how do you do that? How do you get more peace in your life? You get it by spending 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 20 minutes, just being still in the morning and thinking of the presence in whatever way you want to think about it. That's it. And then I would encourage you to say a prayer in whatever way you want. We teach affirmative prayer here, but make no mistake, just calling out to God and having a conversation is a fine prayer. And if people would do that every single morning, after a minute of stillness or 5 minutes of stillness, your lives would change. If you would be willing to get out in nature once a week for 10 minutes or 30 minutes and just look around and experience, even if it's going to McKinley Park and walking around, or going up to the Capitol, or finding a trail and taking a hike, or getting with Becca. A little chilly for me, but getting with Becca. I promise you, if you will go snowshoeing, you will feel the presence of God in that time that you're there. You might also be calling out, what the heck? Happiness is your divine birthright. And the reason that we talk about it in church is because happy people don't hurt people. Unhappy people hurt other people. And remember, there's only one of us on the planet, and that's God. And so when we hurt each other, we've just injured God in our life. Let's take this message in prayer. I give thanks for this week. I give thanks. I give thanks for our attention on Valentine's Day to give us another reminder of love is in the air. For that's all that is necessary, is love. That's what I was sent here to do. That's what you were sent here to do, is to love, to let it in and out, in and out. That's my divine purpose. There's no other purpose. I give thanks for you. I release this word into the law. Together we say, and so it is.